Hello, and welcome to the Migration Webinar. My name is Sally Struck, and I will be the instructor for the webinar today. Just a little bit about myself. I am a professional services consultant for Graphisoft that covers the Northwest region for North America. We at Graphisoft are providing you with this information to make the file migration process go a little bit smoother. This course is copyright protected, so please don't copy or distribute any of this content without the consent of Graphisoft. Hopefully, everyone is able to see and hear me. If not, and you're attending by computer or phone, please hang up and call back again. I want to make sure that everyone is able to log on, so we're just going to hold here for a little bit. And so, in the meantime, while we're waiting, I just wanted to add that sometimes there may also be bad internet connection, which can also cause video and audio issues. But here's to hoping that it's going to be a smooth session today. And also, as we're waiting for others to come on, please make sure that you're muted to limit any distractions as you come on. For those of you attending the webinar today, you can get AIA Continuing Education credits, and I will explain how to do so in the next slide. Also, for those of you who may not be AIA members, you can also get certificates of completion. Just contact us and we'll make sure to get that to you. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat tab. Someone will get to your question, but if we run out of time, you will get an email response. Now, for those of you wanting the continuing education credits, please type in your name and AIA number in the chat tab. Also, please double check that you are muted again so that there's less background noise that could possibly come through. The key objectives that we will be covering today is to show you how to migrate your projects to the latest version of Archicad. We want to give you a better understanding of the issues that need to be considered during the migration process, and also show you some of the differences like menu changes that will differ from past versions. And so this is going to be done with me first covering the steps and then walking you through the process with an example. In order for you to see and better understand the steps that I'm taking, we have these visual aids, which should indicate the clicks that I'm making with my mouse. Now, my right and left click buttons aren't indicating right now, but at least you can at least see where my mouse is, so that's pretty good. And I am on a Mac computer, so some of the shortcuts or buttons that I press may differ from those who are PC users. So, typically when I say command on a Mac, it'll be control for a PC user. Shift is the same. And when I say option on a Mac, it will mean alt. I will be verbally saying these shortcuts, so we have that throughout this session as well. Today's webinar is broken up into 5 parts. It is set up so you will get a general understanding of the migration process for a typical Archicad solo project. I'm also going to be going through the steps for migrating a teamwork project. And then the other parts you see here, part 3, part 4, and part 5, are all about looking to some of the migration considerations that you might want to take into account when coming into these previous versions and bringing them up. Now, I'm not going to be going through all the changes between what happened from each of these versions, but I will list some changes that could change or impact your workflow. First off, let's start with trying to understand the general migration process. As we start to migrate the project, these are the areas that we're going to want to take into consideration. When you first open a project, there's obviously different file types that we may be dealing with. Now, for this session, we will be mainly dealing with the PLN format, which is the Archicad solo project, as well as the teamwork project. I will be talking about, some of the other file formats, such as the TPL, which is an Archicad project template, and some of the considerations that we might have for that, but I won't be showing you how to update a template today. It will be very similar to when you update an Archicad solo project, but I will be talking about some of the differences, such as your work environment. Now, the other file formats that you see here are the PLA, which is an Archicad archived project, and an MOD, which is an Archicad module project. Now, the Archicad archived project, as it is in the description itself, it is an archived version of the Archicad solo project. What does that mean? It means when this project was saved at the time in this specific context, it means that it was saved with only anything that was being used at the time. If it was not being used, it was purged and not saved in this encapsulated format for use in the future. So again, I won't be showing you that today, but I kind of just wanted to, tell you what was in an archived project and how it's a little bit different from the Archicad solo project. And then the MOD file, again, which is the Archicad module project, it's generally used for the creation of repetitive plans and elements in the design. So, those are some of the file formats that you need to consider when you're doing any migration. Along with, taking into account your file format, you're going to want to make sure that you're going to be using the migration libraries. So I'll be showing you this today, but showing you how to use and load the migration libraries. They help a lot when, you migrate a version up. There was the potential that you might have had a lot of missing elements and objects. So the migration libraries just help with making sure that things populate and aren't missing. And then you also want to make sure that if you do have, like, let's say, specific objects that you're using, that you may actually want to extract them individually and then load them specifically into the migrated version of the project if you plan on reusing them again and again. And they could also be in your embedded library, but we're going to want to make sure that we're at least using the migration libraries, and I'll show you how to update elements in the migration libraries later. Then you can unhost the migration libraries from your projects in the future, so you don't have to do one more library that's linked. Not only is the file format important in the migration libraries, but people always forget that we also need to update the information that's in these projects. And what I mean by that is, there tends to be updates in the classification systems that are being used and the properties. And why is that important? Well, a lot of these classifications are already pre-mapped to different IFC standards, for example. And when you bring them in properly or you update to the latest, you're not going to have to remap anything and it's going to act very predictable. So I want to show you how to do that as well. And when you do the migration process, the information does not automatically update with it. Like let's say the elements and objects in that, for example, which might go up into the next version. So again, we're going to be also talking about how do you migrate your information, well, not migrate, really update your information. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is remember that when you're migrating one project, let's say it's a host, and then you might have other projects linked to it, you're going to want to make sure to update all of those hot links as well. You can't have different versions linked into each other. So that is something that's going to be very, very important to take into consideration. So now let's start at the very beginning with opening the file. What are you going to do? The steps are actually really quite simple. One, you want to make sure you have the latest version of Archicad already open. Now, I only do this just to make sure that when you do the migration, you already know what's going to happen to the latest. You're not just going to select on double click on the file and then open it in an older version. This is just a way to be careful. And then what you're going to do is, in this case, you're going to go up to File. You're going to go to Open. You're going to hover over Open, and then you're going to search for that project that you want to migrate up. And now, my preference is to also check in. There's like a little box that's called Launch a New Instance of Archicad. And I like to check that box before I hit open. And that's just so, let's say I'm working on other Archicad projects or something like that. It just means that it's not going to close it out. And so that's a little extra step that I do. You don't need to, but I will show you where that is. And then once you start the process, the migration assistant will appear. And then you just want to make sure that you hit this Migrate Archicad Libraries button when it does appear. Now, I do want to talk about some possible issues that you may run into when you're doing this, such as, you might have missing library parts or missing classifications. That's probably due to the fact that when the file version was saved originally, it probably had those missing originally. So something that you may want to do before even migrating to the latest version is open up the file in its original version and just double check to see that there's no errors or duplicates or anything that's showing up and that it's pretty clean before you do this process. Now, earlier I was mentioning a little bit about project, the Archicad solo project format and the template format and what were some of the considerations. The biggest one is going to be the work environment and how that comes through when you do the migration process. Now, if you are opening just your normal solo project into a newer version, it's going to be pretty simple. You're going to see the newer tools and settings from the very start. It will be applied to whatever you open. So if you would like, and let's say there's a previous work environment that you would like, you can of course bring them in, but what I would suggest is taking a look at the newer work environments and really just adjusting those to work for you. Now, the template acts a little bit different when you do open it. What will happen? Well, it will open up with its original work environment. What does that mean? That means that some of the newer tools that you may be seeing may not be visible. It's in your Archicad project, but you don't see it. And so if you keep on continuing with your older work environment, you may be missing out on some tools or functions. And so the suggestion is when you do open up a template, just go to your Archicad work environment. There's a few locations where you could do that, but the easiest one is just go to Options, go to Work Environment, go over to Apply Profile, and then you could cycle through some of the new ones. like I suggest you do for your normal solo project, and then adapt those new ones to uh, kind of see what you had before and then adapt that so that you make sure you have a lot of the new tools and setup that that are available to you. So after we've taken a look at the work environment, we are going to want to make sure that the required libraries are in place. And we also want to, get a better idea of what's actually in this project. Take a look at what migrated, what didn't. And so I'm going to be showing you the steps of where to find your libraries. You're just going to go up to the File drop-down menu. You're going to go down to Library Manager, and you're going to open that up. Once you do, you should see something similar to what I have on the screen here. Now, this first portion right here, that is more of an overview of the different libraries that are a part of the project. And you'll notice that I have some arrows right here. Those are important to understand, what is coming from where as a general overview. So this right here tells me in this case there's 21 placed objects and that there's a whole bunch of placed instances of those objects coming from the migration library, for example. And then if there's anything that you need to fix with that library, it will notify you right here. Now, if you select on, let's say, the migration libraries, and then click the next button over, that gives you a deeper dive into looking at what is in that library. And then what I'm going to be showing you is, just cycle through what's in these. Again, take a look at the number of place objects, instances, and library parts. It gives you a better understanding of what is going on and actually what to search for. Once you get a good idea of what objects are in the project, we are going to want to replace those old objects with newer ones if we can. Main reason being is, there's different settings, maybe even different features that are with those objects that you may want to use versus the old ones. And so that's why I suggest doing this, especially if you're continuing to work on the project. If you don't need to, let's say, work on some of these elements and they're more for reference, then you can leave them in their original version. You can leave the migration libraries. It's just one more thing connecting to your projects. So I do want to go through the process. I'm going to show you some workflows to identify and replace them, um, just to help a little bit. But just know you don't need to do this. And so the steps that you're going to be doing are, one, you're going to find the object that you want to replace, and then you're going to go into the settings of that object that you selected. And after you've done that, you're going to go to the search area, and then you're going to search for that object, but pay attention to the number at the very end of the name. You want to look for whatever is in the latest version versus what you have in the project. And what's going to be very key is after you search for it, you actually don't want to select on this project yet. It is very bad. I'll show you what happens when you do. But what you want to do is make sure you do not select on it. Use the syringe tool to inject the properties of the current object into the new one. Um, and then you can utilize that. And the syringe tool keyboard shortcut for a Mac is Command plus Option. For a PC, it's Control and Alt key. And I do want to let you know that you do need to be a little bit careful in checking some of the settings, such as the object insertion point, because it could change. And then it's possible that not all the properties will also transfer correctly, so you might want to check a few things in the settings. And I'll show you some of the inconsistencies that I might have shown in the past, and what to look for in some of those things. So without further ado, let's go through a walkthrough of the process. I'm going to go up to File. I'm going to go to Open. I'm going to go to Open. Now what I'm going to do is make sure I just look for the file that I want to open up. So mine, I kind of have like a convoluted location where I like to keep these. So let me just make sure I find exactly where I want it to go. And we have this example migration project that I want to use as an example. So here's the launch a new instance of Archicad button. I'm going to click that. But what I want you to pay attention to is basically, I know that this is an older version of an Archicad solo project because when I selected on it, it says it's version 22. And then this is uh, the update version of this specific project. So, just pay close attention to what you're selecting. Now I'm going to go to Open. So right now, we're just waiting for Archicad to open that file that I've selected to the latest. So here you could see, the little not icon, but the image that shows up at the very beginning when it's starting to compute everything. And what we're going to be really looking for is the migration assistant box after it loads. So let's click that there. And just to let you know, right now, my version of this project seems to be opening on another screen. So let me bring this over so you can see it. And here is the migration assistant that I was talking about. You can actually skip the library migration and do it later, but it's just easier to do this at the very beginning. So I'm just going to make sure I clicked on this green box right here. And now what it's going to do is it's going to go through the entire project and start converting as many elements and objects as it can to the newest version. Now it may not actually update everything, but I'm going to go through the process of what you should check and look for. Okay, looks like it's almost done. And so here I have my project, letting it update that. And if you do want to, let's say, verify that it updated to the latest version, all you have to do is go up to Archicad, go to About Archicad, and this for a fact tells me it's in the latest version. So you could do this as a double check. Now, I said that earlier, I updated a solo project. In this case, you can see that I have some tools over here that weren't in the old version. In this case, this project came from Archicad 22. And so what you can do if you want to, let's say, test out some of the other work environments, you can go up to Options, Work Environment, Apply Profile, and you can cycle through each of these. You can also click on Work Environment right here and take a look at all like the different tools of things that you may want to add to your new work environment. So that's why I strongly suggest taking a look at what is new and then taking the best of that and adjusting it to your own workflow. So now that I've talked about your work environment, let's talk about going through and making sure that you understand what came in from your libraries. So we're going to go up to File. We're going to go down to Library Manager. So here, you'll see that there's some elements in my embedded library. I'm going to click on this one right here. This is the newest library that's out. And you'll see that 28 of these objects that are placed and a whole bunch of these instances actually did migrate up to the newest version perfectly fine. So that's great. But let's go right here and then check the migration libraries. So in this case, when I selected it, you'll notice that there are some placed objects, in this case 21, and 349 placed instances coming from the migration libraries, so nothing is missing. You'll see right here, this is all library parts were loaded successfully. It'll let you know if there's duplicates or anything like that that you need to resolve. So this is a good place to also check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this right here, the Archicad migration libraries, to take a deeper look of what actually, let's say, stayed in its original version. And now that I'm doing this, all I'm going to do is actually just cycle through and see, wherever there's like a number, that means that something from that version stayed, and that's why the migration libraries are here. So there's nothing in 13, nothing in 14, nothing in 15. I'm just going to keep on going until I see something. So here, Archicad 19 migration library. And you'll notice that there's 8 place objects and 45 instances of those objects. Now, what does this tell me? One thing it tells me is, well, you probably saw that this was a version Archicad 22 project. That means that there are some objects that actually haven't been migrated up through the use of this. So, you can keep them in its original object format that it was designed with, or you could update them to the latest, which I'm going to be showing you. But that's why I wanted to bring this up is, it's been, in this case, this project has been migrated probably since Archicad 19. And so what you can do if you want is just expand these folders and really just keep on clicking and cycling through until something, in this case, hits. And you can just keep on cycling through, opening up, and really get an idea of what's in these libraries. Let me expand that one. Rough carpentry. And you'll see what I'm doing here. I'm just diving in a little bit deeper, trying to understand exactly what is being used in and where. So we have these wood trusses, and then this is a way to do it. There's this pitched how truss from version 19. And so I could copy and paste this into my find and select tool, for example, to look for it. But I'm going to be showing you another way of dealing with, searching through for older objects. This is just so you can get an idea of what migrated from what version. So we have elements from not only 19, but Archicad 20, 21, 22. And look, interestingly enough, you'll notice that, there's nothing from the previous library to be migrated up. Most of it actually migrates pretty well. So, this is a reason why you probably want to update your objects that you're using too, because it's easier to migrate up to the latest version. So now I'm going to hit OK. I have a better understanding of what's in this project. And now that we're here, I'm going to select on this specific garage door. I know for a fact that it actually is an older Archicad object. We can also see this by looking in the info box. It tells me it's a D1 Garage 119. So this right here tells me that this came from version 19, and it's an older object that we can update. So why don't I just show you how to do that right now? I have it selected. I'm hitting Command T or Control T if you're on a PC. And now that I have this, why don't I just take a look at this in Elevation, for example. And here, up in the search area, and actually before I go there, if you take a look at your libraries, you'll see that this came from the version 19 migration library. So now let's actually go search for the object. I'm going to type in the name one by one. So D1 garage. I spelled garage wrong. 1. And we're just going to look for the latest version, which is right here. Now, I'm going to do something which I told you you shouldn't do, and that's just click on the newer version in the first place and click OK. What you'll see is that this is going to be completely different from what you were probably using before. So I'm going to undo that with Command Z. And so I'm going to show you this again. Do not click on what you just searched for in the latest version. What you want to do is hit Option Command on a Mac. That's a shortcut for the syringe tool right here. On a PC, it's Control Alt key. And now that I have this syringe, I'm going to inject it. I'm going to inject the properties into this library part. You notice that the sizes stayed the same. There are a few things that are different, for example, like the leaf style. So maybe I will just take a look at the leaf style, change that back, cycle through any of the settings to make sure that everything stayed the same. This all looks good, and now I'm going to hit OK. So now you'll see that if I look up in the info box, that it does say that it's the latest version of that, in this case, door, the garage door. And so that is one way, you can actually replace objects. Another way is to use the Find and Select tool. So that's this icon right here. I'm going to select on this, and you can search for something that meets a criteria, for example. Let's go to element type is all types. Maybe I'll go to add and type in name. Let's add in the name right here. And I'm just going to say name contains or actually ends with. I know that there were some objects that ended in 19. So I'm going to type in 19 right here, hit the plus button. And here you could see that it's selected 44 different elements that are in that 19 category. So what I can do is, hit F4, isolate it, go through one by one and update those. But that's really up to you to choose to do. So let me undo that. Something that I like to do actually is use graphic overrides. Graphic overrides is really, really powerful. So I suggest, learning what you can do with it. So what I like to do is go down here. I'm going to click on this graphic override combination, and I'm actually going to create a new one. I'm going to hit new, and let's call this audit object. Or actually, you know what? I'm going to call this check object audit. I'm going to hit OK. And so now I have this new combination, but I don't have any rules for it or criteria for it to look for. So I'm going to hit add, and I'm going to create a new rule. In this case, let's create one called old objects red, for example. And I'm going to hit OK. And let me expand this. I'm going to click on the 3 dots. What that's going to do is it will allow me to actually say how it's going to be graphically overridden and really determine what criteria triggers that. So first thing I'm going to do is just leave it at element types is all types. I want it to search for everything. Next thing I'm going to do is let's type in name again. I'm going to type name in as a category. Now, I could say, you know what, it does contain or does not contain. Why don't I just go with ends with this time? Or actually, let's actually go with does not contain. And in this case, I'm going to type in 24 for this current version. That way I know that it's not the latest. I will let you know that it can trigger and highlight some things that don't actually have a number in it. So that's just an FYI. What I'm going to do in this case is, let's say I want all the lines to actually be red. And that's like not only in 3D but 2D. And let's just change the surface so we can identify it in my current view. Gonna want to make sure that that is set to red. And I'm gonna hit OK. I'm gonna hit OK again. Now you can see how this is going to be working. So easily enough, I'm taking a look at this and you can say, oh, you know what? There's a whole bunch of these elements in red. There's this stair, this door, these railings, but it's still a little bit hard to identify maybe what's on the inside. So let me show you how to use graphic overrides a little bit more. So I'm going to click on this combination again, and I'm actually going to create another rule. I'm going to call this all objects transparent. Hit OK. And then I'm going to clarify what criteria that is. Now, in my case, I'm actually just going to leave it at all types. You're probably wondering why, I didn't just do the inverse of the all objects right as a criteria. That's because I don't need to due to the order of operations, as you can see right here. So I'm going to leave it as this. Maybe I'll just make sure, actually, I don't want to override the line type. Let's, again, just change the line. Maybe I'll make it gray. And let's change my surfaces to glass, just so it's transparent. I'm going to be OK. So this all looks good. I'm going to hit OK again. And now we can visually see, all those elements in red. This will be very helpful in identifying all the old objects that you need to update. And, I would suggest you just visually go through one by one and change all of those. So again, let me open up my graphic override combinations. I want to talk about the order of operations a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change my all objects transparent to the top. Now it's the very highest priority. I would just want you to see what will happen. I'm going to hit OK. And notice that every single thing became transparent. This is why when you're using graphic overrides, it's going to be very important in how you create these and how you order them. So I'm just going to put my old objects red at the top again, hit OK. And then now I've identified, each of those things that I need to fix in an update. So maybe I'll select on this door, for example. I'm going to bring back the Find and Select tool. Select on this. Maybe, I don't have this criteria yet. I'm going to hit remove, or actually maybe I'll just add the name back. But the good part about this is you can really define a specific criteria for it to meet. Like maybe I'll add another rule that looks for the length or maybe width of the door. Profile modifiers. Let's go expand this. Element type. Well, either way, you can actually get really specific to what you're working for. You can even choose classifications and everything else. But what I did want to show is notice that this is empty right here. Name contains, it's set to all types, but I did pre-select this door. I could select other things while I'm here too, but let's just say I select on this door. If you hit this button right here, it will copy the settings of what you have selected into the Find and Select criteria. And if you hit the plus button, it will find everything that actually meets that criteria as well. So now that I have this, I have it all selected. There's 5 of these doors. What can you do? Again, you can go hit Command T, open up the settings. Now this is D1 entrance. So let's look at that one there. Type in D1 entrance. Here's the newest version. Again, I'm not going to click on this first. I'm going to use the syringe tool to inject the properties. Notice that right here, my door leaf has changed a little bit. I'm going to change it back. You can always go through these different settings and cycle through them to whatever fits the most. And I'm going to hit OK. So now that I've done that, you'll see that they are no longer red. and I no longer need to, go update that to the latest. So something that I do want to talk about while I'm here is these railings right here, this rail parallel bars 20. Let me hit Command T and let's see if we can find the latest version of it. Rail parallel, and we'll just see if anything shows up. Now, there's probably, actually, uh, there's not going to be a newer version of this rail parallel bar, for example. That's because there's a dedicated tool. Um, so I suggest possibly modeling them with the newer version of the tool and replacing that. But there are some things that just there aren't any newer versions for. So that's just kind of an FYI on some of the changes. Now, what I also wanted to show is not only does the graphic override apply in 2D, but it can also, 3D, but it can also apply in 2D. So as an example, let me go to, let's double click on a floor plan. And I'm going to go down here to my graphic overrides, and I'm going to select that graphic override. And here, what you'll find is, there's some things in red for me to start cleaning up. So you can, the great thing is you could choose which environment you want to do this in. I'm going to just select on an elevation, for example. Now, elevations don't actually have a number associated with it, so of course it's going to be red. So you can leave those alone. But let's take a look at these markers, for example. I'm going to select on this right here. It's a window. Notice over here, the window itself actually is in a newer version of that element. But if you notice right here where it says marker type, that is set to the older version of this element. So what I'm going to do is just select on this. Let's just change that to the newer version. In this case, you might have to go through the settings and update it so it looks the same. So hit Command T. Let's go into this dimension marker area and symbols and text, and maybe just going and clean up uh, exactly what you want to see. So I believe this one was a hexagon. There was no extension line. You probably don't want to see the dimensions. And so you just have to go through and clean this information up so that you're not having to see as many things as unneeded. And maybe save that as a favorite so that you don't have to adjust this every time. But this is one of the very nice things that you could do to start updating the project to the latest that is very workable for everybody else. Great. So now that I've covered the model portion of updating a project, we also have to take a look at updating the associated information as well. Because we know that BIM isn't just about the model, but the information that it produces is also very important. It's what makes our schedule so smart. So I want to show you how to update the available information with classifications and properties, which are, interlinked in Archicad, which you can see here. This is the classification manager, and then you could click on the property manager right here. So you could switch between the two. Now, classifications are very, very important if you're working with the IFC process, which stands for Industry Foundation Classes and is a non-proprietary format of BIM Exchange. So I'm going to show you how to bring in the classifications first, and I'll be showing you how to update the translators later. But you need to do this first. It's going to be very important. Now again, I'm on a Mac. The location is going to be a little bit different for where you're going to search for on a PC, but I do have this guide, and I'll note where to find the Graphisoft folder in on a PC, which is a little bit different from a Mac. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to go to the options menu. You're going to go to classification manager. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on this little icon right here to try to import from the latest template. So all that's already in there. You don't have to do any remapping or any work. And so that's why I want to show you this. And just an FYI, there's this little icon right here with a circle with a little eye in it. If you happen to use different classification formats like OmniClass or Uniclass or anything else, you can always click on this button. It'll take you to an internet browser and it will allow you to download different systems if you do happen to use it. Okay, once you actually update and bring in the latest classifications and properties, you have to update your elements and your objects that you're using with the newer classifications and properties. And so there's a couple of different ways to go about doing this. You'll see option one, you can just select on an element, go down all the way down to its classifications and properties tab, and actually just say, hey, you're going to assign this to a new classification as appropriate. You can do that. It's very easy. Another thing you can do is also use the Find and Select tool, which I'll show you in a bit. It's very powerful. And option number two is to actually use schedules, which is my preferred way of doing things. And what you'll probably notice is I have the scheme settings over here. This is what I suggest having at a minimum as your fields. Element type, the previous classification system was already there. The newest one that you brought in, and also the quantity. And I'll be showing you possibly the need to add more, let's say fields, to further identify what each of the items are. But that's really up to you to decide. I would say this is basically the minimum that you need. And when you do this and you take a look at the schedule, you're just going to want to make sure that anything that says undefined in it has an assigned classification to it. For those of you doing the IFC process, we are going to want to make sure that we have the latest IFC translators. And I'm going to show you how we bring that in, and it's fairly easy. You're going to want to make sure you go to the File drop-down menu, go down to Interoperability, go to IFC, and then IFC translators. Once you do that, there's this little icon right here where you can click on it that will allow you to import from the latest template all the latest translators that we have and import them. It's as easy as that. And so I'll be showing some things that you need to look for, but it's going to be really important that you have the latest translators because they're going to be meeting different IFC class considerations, and it's already pre-mapped so that everything is working well. So that's less work for you if you bring it in. So let's take a look at updating the information in a project. I'm going to bring over the project that I had open previously, this one right here. And now that I have this, let's first bring in our classifications. And we do that by going up to Options, go to Classification Manager. And now that I'm in here, you can see that this is an older classification system. I'm going to go down here, hit the Import button, and I'm just going to go look for the Graphisoft folder on a Mac. I'm going to go to Applications. I'm going to go find Graphisoft folder. And then I'm going to go find the actual latest version that I'm in. And you want to also double click on the default folder. When you do that, notice that there's an Archicad folder. Expand that. And here is where you actually find the default template. And when you're here, notice that it's gray. You want to make sure that where it says enable, you change that to Archicad project files. That will ungray it. So I'm going to select on this template and hit open. So now what I'm going to do to import the classifications is say, you know what, I'm going to include all the properties from the file. I'm going to hit OK. And actually, I'm going to, if there are like, let's say duplicates of like the same naming and the same properties, I'm just going to replace it. I'm going to hit OK. And now you'll see right here, this is the newest classification system that could differ a little bit from the older one. I'm going to expand this. It may be set up a little bit differently, like this is all one giant list. Now there's specified folders, construction elements, and so this is already set up and essentially pre-mapped for you, so you don't have to do a whole bunch of that work. They already have the properties that are pre-mapped for you. So now I'm going to hit OK. And so easy as that, I have the latest classifications and properties brought into this project. So what's the next thing to do? Let's reclassify the object. So you may need to go through this with a lot of your elements, but let's select on this door, for example. Select on this door, hit Command T, open up settings. Now that I'm here, let me just minimize these a little bit. And here is the classifications and properties area. Just going to expand this. And so you'll see that it was already classified in the previous version. I need to reclassify this in the newest version. So I'm just going to select on this right here and make sure that it matches. So I'll just type in door, double click on that, and it's easy as that. I'm using the new classification system, and all the stuff that populates down here in the properties area are in reference to this right here. So I'm going to hit OK. So that's one way of doing things. Let's use the Find and Select tool. I'm going to use the Find and Select tool right here. And you know what? Maybe all the doors in this case are kind of old. I'm going to remove that as a criteria. Now that my criteria is essentially set to looking for anything that's created with the door tool, I'm going to hit the plus button. It's going to find all of that for me in this view. In this case, there's 18 of those elements. And what I want to show you is, there may be some different door types. If I hit Command T, I may actually be changing some of those doors to something different that I, wasn't expecting. So if you do happen to select multiple elements, whether they're the same tool type or not, there's this icon right here that will let you edit the selection set or the group that you have selected. So I'm going to click on this right here. And the nice thing about this is it will allow you to see, in this case, I have 18 doors. I could have a wall in this. It identifies it down here. But the nice part about this is you can actually change the classification property in mass through this setting. So I'm going to click on this right here, expand it, and I'm just going to type in door. Select on that right there and hit OK. And so now all of these should have the door classification. So I'm going to unselect that. Let me select a different door, maybe this one right here. Hit Command T. So here you'll see that it is indeed associated with the new classification. So that is a way of working. Let me show you the other way, which is to use schedules. So I'm going to go over to my project map. Let's go over to my schedules, elements. I'm going to create a new schedule. Maybe I'll call this check, call it classification audit. Hit OK. And now let's take a look at what fields I'm going to put in. I'm going to add fields. Let's add the element type. I'm going to also add in classification. This is the old classification system. It's good to have in here so you could use it as a reference of what it should be when it is in the newer version. This is the latest one that's been updated. And the good thing about the newer versions of the classification system is you'll notice that it's actually not Archicad version specific. These actually get updated whenever there's a new IFC version. So you don't have to do this every single time. If you are in Archicad 23, it uses this system. So you don't even have to do this information update that I'm showing you right now. Okay, so the other field that I want to add is quantity. So now that I have all of this, I'm going to hit OK. And let's take a look into this right here. And now that I have, this visible, let's merge my uniform items. And if you hit the three dots right here, you can also resize the columns and the rows. So I'm going to resize the columns, resize the rows, hit OK, and this should automatically fit everything for me. Now, the main reason why I merged my uniform items is, this allows me to bulk change all these different elements at once. And you'll probably notice that some of these elements, when I select them, they may say that they're like on a locked layer or something like that, so they might not be changeable. So, this is something that you need to pay attention to when you're doing this. The benefit of doing a schedule is you can do all of these changes in one location. So over here, see some of the beams are hidden. So in this case, maybe I'll just go over here and I'm just going to, let's say, create a new schedule in my view settings that is able to see everything that's unlocked. So let me hit the plus button right here. Instead of the layer combination being floor plan, I'm going to set it to all visible and unlocked. So, these view settings that you're seeing right here can actually affect what you're seeing in your schedule. So let me hit create. And here is my check classification audit. Now let me go to my being. You'll notice that it's not locked anymore. And so here, what I'm going to do is go to, that's an Archicad beam. It's classified as a 22 beam. It's probably going to become a beam again. So I'm just going to double click on that. And the nice thing about this is all those 42 items, those beams, now are classified in the newer version. So you can just go through this list and it's quite easy to do. So again, let's select door, for example, expand this. Let's tap door, hit choose, and then we'll just change that right here. So just go through and clean these up and so until nothing says undefined anymore. And actually, one more thing that I want to show you before going back to the other part of my presentation or the webinar is updating your IFC translators. So I'm going to go to a floor plan view. To do that, you go up to File, Interoperability, IFC, and then IFC translators. When you're here, you can see that there's only two in this project. You go down here to the import icon. It remembers where I was searching last, so I'm just going to select the latest template, hit open. And in this case, I'm just going to check this to bring all of the translators from import and export. There's 23 of them. You could be selective of which ones you want to use, but I'm just going to hit import. And you'll see now I have all those new translators in the latest version. So this is the one that was previous. You'll notice that the type mapping in this case is set to Archicad 20. That doesn't even match the Archicad 22 project format that it was originally set up as. And here is the newer version of it that's set to the newest classification that we're using. So when you set it up correctly, this gives you a pretty good idea of things working correctly. So let's say I have this newer version. I want it to be my default. Go down here and say set preview. So now this is going to be my default. I'm going to hit OK. And just to double check everything, I'm going to go back to my schedule. And I'm actually going to add a new field. Go to Scheme Settings, go to Add Field, and I'm going to add IFC Type. Double click on that right there. Let's move that up. Hit OK. And now let me click on this button to fix, try to fit everything. And what you'll notice is this will give you a preview of what something is supposed to be exported as to IFC if you use that translator. So here, you notice that when we change this to beam, there's IFC beam. If it says undefined, it translates as IFC building proxy. This is door, it's set to door. So, over here, maybe I'll go here, type in column. If I do my job correctly, it should say IFC column over here. There you go. So just go through and making sure all the information is connected and works with one another, and then we should be pretty good. Now, the last piece of the general migration process and making sure that everything is working well is trying to make sure that you're updating the attributes as appropriate. Now, you may not need to update the attributes, but sometimes there's renewed surfaces in the newer versions of the template that you might want. And so if you do, then you're going to want to go through this process and open up the attribute manager, which you do by going to options. And here's the attribute manager. When you open that up, you see a dialog box that's like this, and you could cycle through all of the different attributes that you see. And basically, just clean up as you go. Down here where I have management options, that's more for your reference to depending on your scenario, how something is supposed to act. Like, if you have a new material from another template that you want to use that just changes in name or a number, it's very easy. So this just tells you the steps in which you should take if you choose one of those options. I'm going to show you one of the options, which is just the most difficult, is taking something from, let's say, another template or project that has a completely different index number and a completely different name, and show you what process that is to go through. So without further ado, let's go through the process. And I'm going to bring over that project again. Come on. Let's go to 3D. It doesn't really matter if I'm in 3D or not, but I'm going to go up to Options, go down to Attribute Manager. Let me bring over the Attribute Manager. It showed up on a different page. And let's go to Surfaces. Now, the interesting thing about this is, you get to see all of the attributes that are related to one another. So if I click brick running bond, it tells me what fill it's associated with and the image that it's associated with. So let me show you, if you wanted to take a look at the latest template, what's in there, compare what they have to your own, decide whether you want to change it. This is what you do. You click on this import button. You find where the template is. You hit open, hit continue, and now you get to see what's in a different project and compare it to your own. This is also a good way for you to update different hot links in different projects so they have the same index numbers and attribute settings. That way, like something that's, let's say, brick running bond in this project is not different in another project. So this is a really good way of checking. So as I was saying, as an example, let's say you really like this new masonry non-structural. Here's the fills that it came with. There's a new image that you want to use. What do you do in order to bring it over? So I have this selected. I have this over here. Easiest thing to do is actually, in this case, just highlight and copy the name. go over to the other side, you see that anything I do here is temporary. It's not going to change the actual template file itself. And I'm going to paste that with a new name. And now that that has the same name as that, I'm going to select on it right here and pay attention to these arrows. This one's append, it would add it to the end of the list. You could change by index, which is the number. If I click on this, it's going to go to number 1, which doesn't exist on this side, and make a new material. In this case, I changed the name, so I want to overwrite that here. So I'm going to click on that. So this now has the newer attributes and all the settings. And the great thing about the newer versions, if you go to this change area, you can see you know, what's happening before you just hit OK. So in this case, I modified the surface type and I also added a new fill. So now I'm going to hit OK, apply and close. But yeah, it is really up to you to decide which attributes you want to update. You don't have to if you don't need to, but there's some changes that might be good to take into consideration. So after all of this, I want to again give you an overview of the process that we just went through, the general migration process for an Archicad solo project. First off, you generally want to start in the latest version of Archicad, and then you want to check the libraries to see if there's anything missing, check to make sure that what objects actually did migrate up to the latest versions, which ones you may want to migrate up or change using a different tool. So library management will give you an idea of how it migrated up. The replacing old objects with the latest, you do that with the syringe tool and understanding, what is old. I showed you different methods of trying to identify what old objects were in the project. And, not only is updating the model portion of the project important, but the information as well. So I showed you how to do that, how to import the latest classification systems with the properties, how to associate everything in the project with newer versions of the classifications, and then updating your IFC translators as well. And lastly, talked about updating your attributes. You don't need to, but you may want to. And it's just a good thing to check. And just double check the attribute manager. It's also a good way to make sure that all your hot links and all those different projects, have the same settings. So I have covered the process for an Archicad solo project. We're now going to cover the process for a teamwork project. There's actually a couple of different options that you have when migrating up a teamwork project. The first option is a dialog flow. It's actually pretty simple in the way that it works. And I'm going to be showing you that soon. I will be showing you another option, a manual process. And the reason why you would do that is, just for added redundancy and safety when you're doing this. If you do the dialog flow, it's all within this, all within the cloud that it's resided in. And so, it is easier. So that's what I want to show you first. And so the key to doing this dialog flow is you need to actually open the teamwork project in its original file version. Okay? You do not start on the latest. You open it in its original file version. And then you go into teamwork, project. You go down to migrate project and there's a prepare for migration button. This will start the dialog flow. And then, after you go through the sequence, it will ask you, are you done or do you want to do this to other projects? So that's the nice thing about this is, let's say you have a lot of hot links and a lot of other teamwork projects that you're using. This will allow you to continue doing that in a pretty easy sequence. Some additional notes that I want to talk about are when you start this process, you have to make sure that all the users send their changes before you do this and just all exit out of the project because when you start this process, the teamwork project will be locked. So that is going to be very important to know and consider. So after you've done that, the next thing you're going to do is open the latest version of Archicad. Then you're going to go to Teamwork, Project, Migrate Project, and then go to Migrate Prepared Projects. Then you choose from that list. Make sure to check the Migrate Archicad Libraries box just so it's changing all of those up similar to how it's done in the general migration process. And select the appropriate Brim Cloud destination, login, and click on Migrate. It's pretty simple actually. Um, when you do this process, know that only the users and roles will actually translate from the teamwork project. The other stuff, it will essentially be gone, and you will have to actually manually delete the old teamwork project as well. So without further ado, let me show you this process. I'm going to bring this project over. I'm going to go up to Archicad, go to About Archicad, so you can see that it's in an older version than we're in right now. And you're going to go up to Teamwork, go to Projects, Migrate Project, and Prepare for Migration. Here it's asking if I want to send all changes, so yes, I'll just make sure to send all the changes right now because, this will lock up the actual BIM cloud itself. Or not BIM cloud, the Teamwork project. So let's just have it do its thing. And now you'll see the Migrate Project dialog box. And here it'll tell you, same things that I was just telling you earlier about this process, such as make sure all users leave the project. It will lock the project so you don't accidentally edit it anymore, and it will force you to leave the project. So I'm going to hit prepare. And now it says, you know what? It's finished preparing. You can either at this point open another project and then continue the process or finish preparing. And I'm going to hit close. Okay, simple. That was the first part. Part two, open the latest version of Archicad as you see here, just to verify that we're in the latest again. Go to Archicad, About Archicad. Here's the newer version. And then we're going to go to Teamwork, Project, Migrate Project, and go to Migrate Prepared Projects. I'm going to click on this right here. And all you have to do is you need to find the project that you want to migrate up, such as this. Check on the Migrate Archicad Libraries button. Hit Next. And in this case, you need to find the BIM Cloud that you're using, whether it's BIM Cloud Basic or BIM Cloud SaaS. This is SaaS. You need to sign in as an appropriate user that has the correct permissions. And then you could choose the destination path. I'm going to hit Migrate. And you could choose to change the name if you want. I'm going to just hit Rename and just wait for this as it goes. So here you're seeing that it's actually, same thing as the general migration process. It's taking a look at all those elements to update up to the newest version. And while this is going, I'm actually going to make sure I check my BIM Cloud library on this side. Okay, so right now we're just waiting for it to process. And so when I do the manual process, I probably won't be saving it officially to BIM Cloud, just to let you know, so we can, go through some of the other content that's actually in this webinar. But I did want to show you, if you do the dialog flow, it's actually pretty easy. Everything right here, it's still migrating the project. And after this is done, I'm just going to check the Archicad version just to make sure that it's in the latest. And, you know, you should be essentially opening a teamwork version of that project. Okay, just waiting for this to finish calculating and doing its own thing. One of the reasons why this may also be taking a while is because since it's migrating all the elements in the teamwork project up, there's a lot more information associated with the teamwork project, and it's actually essentially creating a new local on my computer that it's going to be opening for the first time. So when you first join a project or you're opening a new local, it does take a while to um, basically work. And so now I've gotten this notification that says migration has been completed. Great. You can leave the migration process, join the migrated project, migrate another project. I'm going to just leave the migration process right now. And I've closed out of Archicad. So let me open up my migration webinar that I had before. And I'll go back to where I previously was, and then we can continue through the manual process of migrating a teamwork project. Okay, so here's the migration webinar. Let's go back to where I was before. So I'm now in this manual process, and I'm going to cover that. What do you do? First step is pretty similar to what you do in the dialog flow. Um, the first step actually is to download the libraries, in this case, the BIM libraries that are being used as local versions. Um, and then we're going to be essentially saving these as PLNs. And then you will repeat essentially the general migration process. When you do this process, what's nice about it is because I'm saving a local PLN, I'm essentially saving a version of that for myself instead of only residing or only work assuming that everything on the migration dialog flow is working correctly. So this is more of like a redundant process. It's more steps, but it's a little bit more extra protection. So what you're going to do is you open up the Archicad in its original file version. You go up to the File drop-down menu, you go down to Library Manager, and there will be some icons that you can click on that will allow you to essentially open up that project and download those libraries. And then we're going to save that as an Archicad solo project. So let me actually open up Archicad 23 again. So where is Archicad 23? Looks like it hasn't shown up yet. So let me force quit it. I have a lot of applications open. So let's just force quit the old version of Archicad. Let's force quit. And I'll just reopen that up. Okay, so let me try opening up Archicad 23 again. Here you go. Looks like it's starting this time. And I am going to go to that teamwork project. Wait for it to open up and let me join. And again, you need to open it up in its original format version. Let's get that update. I'm going to select on that. You could see that this is, again, the older version. I'm going to launch a new instance of Archicad, hit join, and hit OK. Now again, as I said, this might actually take a while to open up. When I did the previous process of that dialog flow, it actually made me leave the teamwork project. So on another screen, I actually just unlocked it again so it would be editable. And so that I could show you, if you didn't do that process, what it would look like. So we're just waiting for it to essentially update and come over and make it a new local version on my computer. So let me bring this over here. And let it all come in. Oh, and actually, I think I forgot to talk about the other steps besides just saving your the library. So as this is actually opening up, let me talk about the other steps in this process. So step one, download local versions of those BIM cloud libraries and save it as a PLN. Step two, you're going to open up that PLN that you saved in its original version, and you're actually going to relink the libraries. When PLNs get saved, the way the location and the libraries that it was using get saved with it. So that's why I had you download the local versions of that library because we're going to relink them. So PLNs should not be the libraries that they reference should not be referenced from a BIM cloud library. And so we're going to essentially reassociate those and then save those as a PLN again. And the last part of this is to open up that file in the latest version of Archicad and follow that entire general migration process for cleaning up. And then once you're done with cleaning up the objects, elements, information, attributes, then that's when you want to, again, bring that back up into Teamwork. And you can log into your BIM cloud. You just need to know the address, your username, password, and then hit the share button. So over here on this side, it looks like it's finally loaded. Again, if I go up to Archicad, about Archicad, you can see this is the older version again. And what you want to do is go up to File, go to Library Manager. And what I want you to see is notice that there's an embedded library. There's nothing in this project in the embedded library, but anything with the hexagon tells me that it's a BIM cloud library. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reserve the library manager. And then you can actually just hit this button right here. This will let you manage your BIM cloud libraries. And let me bring this over. It showed up on a different page. So let me get this out of the way. So that was the Archicad 23 library that was referenced in this. So you select on the library from the BIM cloud that you're using. And if you hit this icon right here, it will let you download a local library. So I'm just going to stick this on my desktop. And then I'm going to hit OK after this is done processing. So now I have a local version of that library that's being used by this specific project. So I'm going to hit close. Then after I've done that, I'm going to go to File, Save As. And now on my desktop, I am going to maybe take that part away and save this as an Archicad solo project. That way, you already understand what process you need to go through. So now that I've done that, I'm saving a solo version of this Teamwork project. Just going to wait for it to process, and I'm now going to go to File, Open, Open. And I'm going to search for that project. So here, where is the example migration project, a solo version of that Teamwork project? I'm actually not going to launch. Actually, yeah, I'll just launch a new instance and hit Open. And while that's processing, let me move this old one out of the way. Here's the new one. So just waiting for it to process. Let's stretch that to full screen. I'm going to go to File, Library Manager, and you'll see right here in my Library Manager, it's still referencing that BIM Cloud library. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Add. I'm going to look for that local library. In this case, I put it on my desktop, hit Choose. And so you'll see that there's a difference in icons. Anything with a hexagon is an older BIM Cloud library. With the folder, that's a file folder structure, that's a local library. So I'm just going to select on the BIM Cloud library, hit this X button, so it's no longer referencing that, and hit OK. And now just going to basically relink everything that was from that BIM Cloud library to that local library that I have. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Save. And then there I have it. I have essentially a normal Archicad solo project to essentially clean up the way I showed you before in the general migration process. So, after you've done the cleanup, all you have to do is go up to Teamwork, Project. Again, what I showed you before, you can go to Share. This time, it's a little bit different. So let me bring this over. So here is share my teamwork project. After you're done editing and migrating it up to the newer version, when you finish the process, change the name, find the BIM cloud that it's supposed to go in, and then hit the share button. And it's as simple as that. So now that I've done that, let's go back to the webinar. So I've gone over the migration process generally, as well as, what do you do when you migrate a teamwork project? Now what I want to do is talk about some of the things to consider when you're migrating from Archicad 23 or 22. So starting from this version on, a structural model can actually be generated from the built-in tools in the program. So if this feature seems handy to you, you should definitely consider updating your project to the latest version. So here, this is the physical model designed with the tools that you see here. Then all you have to do is go down here to where you have the partial structure display and make sure that it's set to only showing load bearing. So it takes all those other materials off of that element. And then you can also, choose to see the analytical model with, the way everything is modeled, or just the line model itself. But that is a new function from this version on. Another feature that has been added is the MEP modeler. It's actually no longer going to be an add-on and actually built into this version. And you might have seen it a little bit before, but the easiest way to access the MEP tools is actually to change your work environment. So you do that by going to Options, Work Environment, Apply Profile, and there will be an MEP profile that you can apply that gives you access to this routing tool and also a whole bunch of these other tools. And I showed you before, you can always go up to Archicad work environment through options as well. You can still go through and customize and add these to your toolbox if you want. This is where they're located. This is just the easiest place to go find it. So without further ado, let me change this back to my work environment from before, just because that's how everything was set up. Now, what you see on my screen, it's just a few new residential furniture objects added to the library to make sure that your renderings and designs feel more realistic. And this is just like a small snippet of some of the residential furniture changes, object changes that we have. So a lot of the objects that have been added to the newer version have more settings for controllability. And so this is also a reason that you may want to possibly update, from an older version to a new one is there's an updated library. Now, although many of the changes to these specific tools, the beam and column tool took place in AC23, you'll find that many of the design tools now also have this structural analytical parameters tab in a whole bunch of their settings. Again, this goes to along with the ability to create a structural analytical model. But the reason why I wanted to talk about these beam and column enhancements is there's a lot of changes that this tool is able to do, especially from Archicad 22. You're able to segment different parts of the column. They can be different shapes, different materials, different sizes. You can control how they flex. And so that is a huge, I would say, a huge um, benefit to allowing you to model better because you get more of these options. And not only that, you can actually control how the tops cut individually, how it's separate from the bottoms, any of the nodes. If you do cuts, you can control how they angle, how they act, and how they work with one another. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you control with the new column and beam tool. So this first one is kind of more about its geometry, the positioning, end cuts. The second one is more, uh, there's also the segments, but the floor and plan and section area is, you can actually see symbolically what it's going to look like when it's in your floor plan. Are you going to see what's above, or you can see what's below? There's a lot of different items that you control once you understand what's in each of these settings. The next one is again, the structural analytical parameters. And then the last one is classifications and properties. So again, that is going to be very important for you to note when you are paying attention and updating your object. Is it worth just the tool enhancements when you're coming from these older versions? And another version from 22 and earlier actually is that there's now a dedicated opening tool, which means that you will no longer have to use morph solid element operations or empty openings or empty door openings, which could affect your schedules. This new tool is very flexible, and you can also control its symbolic appearance. So that's pretty great. So you no longer have to use a morph, cut it through multiple floors, for example, and then draw some of the lines representing the openings that aren't smart. In this case, the symbol is associated with the opening itself. It adjusts if any changes are made. It can be cut through and rotated and changed through multiple elements. It could even be told to cut only partially through some elements. So there's a lot of flexibility. And one of the best things about this is if you happen to be dealing with IFC, for example, the opening tool it will default to an IFC opening. So there's no additional translating that you have to see on the other side. You don't see these masses coming through to the other side anymore because now there's this dedicated tool for it. Now, let's go over some things to consider when migrating from AC21 and AC22, or not 22, 20. Although this next change actually did happen in Archicad 22, uh, after that, there was actually a next generation curtain wall tool that has been further developed. So more enhancements which give the users the ability to control different model view options for all its members essentially. And you could see model view options, for example, you can see that there's a schematic level, a detail simplified level, and then the detail level that's full. And that's all with the same element, and you can control that through model view options. Now, this also works with the stair and railings tool. So I suggest you create these different model view sets that actually control the level of detail so it doesn't have to populate with every in and out because it may not be necessary, and Archicad does need to compute all of those. Another thing that's important is all of the panels and frames that you see here, you can generate them yourself. You can choose which panels are what, whether it's a window, a polygonal window, whether what their building material is, what it looks like. You can actually draw frames. So that's pretty awesome. And not only that, you can actually set the priorities for how all the frames intersect with one another. So this one is just to show how you can control this at your own will by just changing the priority intersection. So there's a lot of controllability if you know where to look for it. And then lastly, all the members that you see here, whether it's like a frame or a panel or anything like that, they all have building materials. Previous versions, it was only at the surface level. So now you can control, when you do a section cut, it can actually be pretty accurate to what you're actually using. So I do want to show you that. So if you are, let's say, using an older curtain wall, you may want to update it to the newer version of the curtain wall, just because um, there's a lot more functionality. When I was showing you how to update the attributes earlier today for the general migration process, you also probably noticed that the attribute manager interface looks different. And I'm not going to go too deep into these changes, but basically you can now get a better idea of the different attribute associations with one another. So in this case, you don't see as many of these different tabs. They've been consolidated. So if you select on a layer combination, you can actually see what layers are associated with them, and also which you can compare them to another project. One of the other differences is before you actually looked for a .aat file if you were going to compare attributes. If in the newer versions, you're either going to look for a template file or um, a project to compare. So it will be a little bit different than what you're used to, but there's a lot that you can do with this. And notice that, again, there's this changes tab here so that, if you do make any changes, you can double check it before saying okay. And so expressions. Although this change actually did take place in Archicad 22, um, there's a new value definition area, as you can see right here, which allows you to, here's expressions, this allows you to essentially do formulas inside of Archicad to do those calculations for you. You just have to understand how to write the formula in order for it to calculate, especially as the design changes. So it's really, really flexible. Like as an example, you could be like, okay, give me the area of a wall. And let's say that wall, give me the area of a, like everything that's JIP, and you know that JIP costs blank dollars per square foot, you can create an expression for that. So if the design changes, like the length of a wall gets shorter or bigger, that will, come out in the schedule and the expression and let you know what the answer to that is. So you don't have to recalculate it every single time. It will update for you. So expressions is really powerful. It can be confusing, but it is a good way to get information out of the model so you can actually get some feedback instead of, you know, designing all the way down the line and realizing, oh, you don't have enough exits or doors for everybody in the building. So let's take a look at actually migrating from Archicad 20. The 3D styles view setting was introduced, and as you can see from my screen, you can essentially create different styles to apply to any of your 3D views instead of having to manipulate them one by one. So this is a functionality that's not only coming from this version, but all the way back, all the way to 20-ish. So this is a pretty big change, and this can help. I just wanted to show you some of the different options that you can pre-populate, and you could just cycle through pretty easily. So this is pretty good, especially if you're working and you need to see things in different manners, especially in 3D. Again, from Archicad 20, a big change that happened is Stair Maker from being an object actually becomes the dedicated stair tool. There's so much more customization that you can do with the stair tool. It can be overwhelming, but when you know what to look for and the different functions, you'll see that there's a lot more design flexibility that you're going to be getting. So if you have a project that's from, let's say, AC20 or earlier that's created with the stair maker, I would definitely recommend remaking it with the stair tool and no longer using the stair maker. Otherwise, those would keep on translating up every time you migrate a project. And when you have to make the changes and you don't get the same flexibility, that may be one of the reasons why. So kind of like the replacement of StairMaker, there is now a dedicated railing tool where the railing itself can actually be associated with elements like slabs and stairs, which means that if the extents adjust, so does the railing. And that's a nice thing about the default railing tool is it has this ability in the newer versions. The railing object from 20 and earlier does not live update, doesn't have this ability. So again, I would recommend remaking, if you're going to be working on this project and continuing on, just remake it with a newer tool rather than using this older one. And another change to take into consideration is the fact that you can use auto text in labels. Previously, the only smart information that you could auto-populate were ID and the GUID. The text part was always manual, but now you are able to even have properties of an element auto-populate a label. So it's very, very powerful. And actually, if you look very closely over here, you'll notice that they also introduced the ability to associate the arrow markers to the first line of text or the bottom line of text instead of just the text box, which was how it was set up in the past. So you aren't just only locked with the text box option now, you have more options than before to try to make sure that the arrow reference is actually going in the correct location. Like once you associate it maybe with the first line of text, you can also control does the arrow line go to the top of the text? Does it go to the center of that text specifically or to the bottom of it? There's a lot more options, when you're going through these newer versions. Okay, now let's go over some of the things to consider when migrating from AC19 and earlier. If you're updating from versions 19 and earlier, I bet one of the first things you probably noticed is that the icons look different and the interface has changed quite a bit. So this is going to take some getting used to. Towards the bottom of my screen, this is actually where you'll see the quick options now. You'll see that this was not available from version 19 and earlier. So this allows you to temporarily change what you're seeing, what you're working on the go. And everything that's in the view map, for example, still remembers the original settings applied to it. So if you click on it, it will always revert back unless you change those settings themselves. So these quick settings allow you to quickly just take a look and change something if you want to get an idea of what that looks like. Not only that, if I hover over any of the tabs, there's a larger preview that you get. And if I click on it, of course, it will take me there. I can always expand it, click on the tab itself. But there's also this area right here. This is actually with these four rectangles. If you click on it, you can see all the tabs you have open up here at once, and then you can click on the one that's pertinent and open that up. So there are a few things to get used to, but usually, the reason why we do this is for the better, to give you different ways of working and try to make things a little bit more flexible, even if it does, seem a little bit scary. It is different. Uh, it does take some getting used to, but the idea is to try to make it more flexible for you once you get used to it. And, earlier when I was talking about the general migration process, I showed you the power of graphic overrides. And well, this actually replaces model view options override fill display. Ooh, that's long. From AC or Archicad 19 and earlier. Notice that there's a lot more criteria that you can specify to change, and you have really great control over, what you will be affecting exactly, because you could specify this criteria and what will be affected. Is it the line type? Is it the line color? Is it fills? Is it the surface? Not only, as you could see in 2D, you can affect, but in 3D as well. So this is a really great tool to understand and really use. Now, there isn't too much to say about properties, seeing as I've gone on and on about information, but I personally believe that properties are amazing because it gives you a great way to control your information. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how that works, for example, because it's going to be probably different from what you've done in previous versions. Essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to open up the property manager. You go up to options. Here's property manager. You're going to create a property. You can create a description for it, and uh, you could expand the value definition. That's you defining, what the possibilities are. Do you fill up some text? Do you have an option set? That's for you to decide. But what's going to be really important is this availability for classification, is you have to make sure that it is actually assigned to a classification. Otherwise, it's not going to show up as a property. So you'll see over here, this property that's created, fire resistance, is also associated with this door classification. So for example, when you select on an Archicad door, you look down here, if it says Archicad classification, notice it has to be the same as what's specified here. If it is, then you'll see that new property that you created in this area below. And that's how you could start controlling properties, because this can greatly impact the information that you schedule. And these properties are really nice because it's not just dumb 2D text. This is associated with the actual door itself in the program. So you can export the schedule to Excel, update the information in Excel, bring it back in, and change the actual properties in the door itself. So that's pretty nice. And if you happen to be migrating from a project from 16 and earlier, you can actually use the legacy properties to make it look like it did in those versions. There's this like little eye icon right here. If you click on it, it gives you more information about what's going to be happening to the project. I have never actually used the legacy properties. It could have actually huge actions on what you're doing inside of Archicad. That's, just if you want to go back and you need to have them on. I did want to emphasize something though, just in case, let's say you're working on a newer version, nothing is changing the way you would like. Let me point out this right here, this note. It says these are only effective on library parts if the override object line types checkbox in their settings is switched on. So what will happen is it will make specifically slabs, meshes, and objects act similar to what it did in the past methods, where everything that's above the home story in this case would be dashed and everything below would be hidden, and apply to these if you go into the object settings and the little checkbox is checked. If it's not, it's not going to have an effect. But the reason why I talk about this is, let's say you're in a newer version, what everything you're doing isn't working properly. You may actually want to check your legacy properties and also that override objects line types checkbox, and uncheck that. If you uncheck that box, whatever you set should most likely apply to those elements and act the way that might be a little bit more predictable. So at this point, I've gone through a lot of information. We have covered what you should take a look at in the general migration process, such as updating libraries and objects to the latest, updating information in the project, and updating your attributes. I've also covered 2 different methods of migrating the Teamwork project. Option A is a dialog flow and option B is a manual process, but that's also, for added redundancy. Some people like that, which is why I show both methods. And then lastly, I covered the many considerations that one has to think about when migrating from previous versions, such as, are there going to be changes to my work environment? Are there additional features and contents that I need to take into consideration? Are there changes to the interface or settings that I'm not going to be used to? And lastly, is there the possible need to model with new tools instead of using old objects? There's a lot to think about. And that's all I want you guys to do is think about these things before you decide to migrate it up. Is it worth the entire process of doing this? Are you going to be working on this project? Is it just a small portion that you need to work on? Really think about, all these things. And, I did mention that I wasn't going to cover everything. So if you like to see a more full overview of the changes that have happened between different versions of Archicad, please take a look at the website that I've listed here. Thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope that it has been helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message at sstruck@graphisoft.com.